Hello Fablous DIYers, it's Daniela Tabois here with Redesign Your Clothes. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you some pieces I'm going to be building for my wardrobe. So if you're interested in learning how to sew this double knot front tie crop top, let's begin. So here I'm going to be working with 1 yard of this gingham checkered poplin. So as you can see, I have 2 colors here and I decided that I want to mix them both. For my lining, I'm going to be using this poly stretch. I love it. It's lightweight and airy, and I use it when I'm working with wovens. All the information about what I'm using in the video will be down in the description box. I'm going to be working with the Sweetheart bodice that I draped years ago. The link of the video will be in this video above and down in the description box as well. And also in the following video, there's a video where I show you how I transferred the drape onto paper and fabric as well. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out my pattern pieces on some cotton fabric, and I'm going to be taking it over to my dress form. So here we are at the dress form. As you can see that the bodice does not fit the dress form because it fits my body. I had fitted it to the shape of my bust line, so that's why it looks like that on the dress form. So what I'm going to do is I want to create 2 portions of the front of my bodice, the bust cup and the lower portion of the bodice at the front. So what I'm going to do is draw the bust cup line underneath, and I want to have full coverage, so I'm going to come down further down the bust line because I'm busty and I don't want my boobs to be hanging for dear life. So if you have a larger bust cup, come down further so you can get the full coverage before creating your line for the lower part of the bodice. Now once you are satisfied with the bust line, then you want to go ahead and draw in your lower portion of the bodice. As you can see that the lines are overlapping because that's how I want to place my pieces when it's time for me to stitch. So once I have everything in place, I'm also going to go ahead and draw I'm also going to bring up the front bottom portion of the bodice as well, because I don't want it to look like a box. I want to kind of curve it upwards so it can create a beautiful tie when it's time. So once I have my lines ready and I like the way it looks, I'm going to go ahead and take it off the dress form and now start perfecting my lines. So here with my hip curve ruler, I'm just going to go ahead and perfect the lines to make sure it's neater and the way I want to, and I'm going to do this for the bust line and also for the line for the lower portion of the bodice. Now I'm going to be cutting one piece on one side of the bust, which is the bra cup, and then the other side I'm going to transfer that line onto the other side of the bodice, so that way I have that pattern piece portion for the lower part of the bodice. So here you can see that I'm going to flip it over to the other side so I can mirror it onto that other side of the bodice, and I'm going to go ahead and cut the center front of the lower portion of the bodice upwards. And then now I'm going to go ahead and trace the line for the lower portion of the bodice onto the other side. By looking through, you can kind of see through the fabric because it's lightweight. And I'm going to also use my hip curve ruler just to perfect it to make sure that it's exactly how I want it. And once I am satisfied, this is what it will look like. And I'm going to just cut and separate my pattern pieces using my snippers, and I'm going to go ahead and cut the bust line on the opposite side of the bodice. And the bottom portion of the bodice, I'm going to go ahead and cut that off too, so I can have the pattern to show you that I am going to be overlapping it at the side seam here. So here's the bottom portion. I'm overlapping it at the side seam. This is what it will look like, and the back bodice will be one piece because I'm not trying to separate it. I'm going to be just leaving it alone just as is. So here are the pattern pieces. As you can see, they're all cut out and separated. And all I'm going to have to do is extend the center front line of the bodice out to create my tabs, and also add a 1/2 inch seam allowance to where I cut the pattern pieces out. So here I am with the paper. You can see the broad cup. I have separated it into 2 pieces, so it have the side panel right there, and the center front of the bust cup, I'm going to extend it out, creating a long tab that's narrow at the tip, and I'm just going to go ahead and curve that the way I want to. I don't want my tab to be too wide. I want it to be kind of in between, narrow and wide at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and draw it the way I want to. Again, my tabs is 12 inches from the center front line, so you can make yours any size that you want, short or long. So here's the shape that I want. I'm going to go ahead and perfect it with my rulers, and then I'm going to add my 1/2 inch seam allowance at the bottom portion of center front panel, and I'm going to swing the 1/2 inch seam allowance back into the front tab, because I don't want to add more width to the tab. So I'm going to do the same thing and copy the bust panel, and then add my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and cut out the pattern pieces. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and create my tab for the lower portion of the bodice, and add my 1/2 inch seam allowance at that top portion where I cut off the bodice. Just making sure that it looks just like the center front bust panel. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and perfect it, and this is what it looks like. And I'm going to add my 1/2 inch seam allowance, again making sure I seamlessly bring it right back into the tab. And once I've done that, these are all my pattern pieces. As you can see, the bust panel is going to be overlapped with the bottom portion of the bodice, and as you can see, the back portion is not separated, it's one piece. And I also did my strap, which is 2.5 inches wide as well, and that will be installed when it's time. So here I am cutting out my pattern pieces, and as you can see, I cut out 4 of all the pattern pieces except for the back portion, which is going to have a lining. So I only cut 1 piece of the self fabric. The front portion of the bodice will be doubled with its own self fabric. And here you can see me testing out to see how the tab will look tied, and it looks good. And I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the bust seam. Now here it is. What I like to do is cut down my seam allowance about 1/4 inch because I don't want it to be too bulky, and then I'm going to go ahead and create some little snips at the curves of the bust line, so that way it can be eased when it's time for me to press. So here I'm going to create some snips that doesn't go through the stitches, just close to the stitch. And this will allow that area to curve when I press. So now I'm going to prep up my strap, and the strap is going to be stitched a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to be placing it at the top neckline of the bust panel. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and here it is stitched into place. This is what the strap looks like. And once again, I'm going to go ahead and cut it down 1/4 inch all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and flip it inside out and then press it flat. This is what it looks like. Now I'm going to place it at the top neckline of the bust panel. I'm going to secure it in place. I already sewed together and stitched the inside portion of the top. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew a 1/2 inch. Here it is all done, and once again I'm going to cut down the seam allowance down to a 1/4 inch because I don't want it to be too bulky in the seam, and then I'm going to flip it inside out. Now once I've pressed it, it will look like this with the strap installed. Now it's time to move on to the lower portion of the bodice. So here's the lower portion of the bodice. As you can see, I'm going to be overlapping it at the top portion of the bodice, and I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around as I did for the upper portion of the bodice. So once again, I'm going to cut away some of that excess fabric, and then I'm going to go ahead and press it. Here it is all pressed and ready to be installed at the side seam. So here is the back portion of the bodice. Like I said, I only cut one piece, which is the self fabric, and I'm just going to measure where the placement of the notches is for those pieces of the front portion and pin it to secure it in place. Now here's the back portion of the strap, which is the same thing as the front portion of the strap that I did. I'm going to place that at the top back neckline, and I'm going to repeat this whole process once again for the other side. Here is the other side, and now I'm going to go ahead and connect the other side of the back portion of the bodice onto the front portion of the bodice. So I already prepared my lining, and now it's time for me to install my lining. And what I'm going to do is flip this over and sandwich all the front pieces onto the back portion of the bodice, and then I'm going to cover it with the lining. So here I'm going to pin it to place, and then I'm going to pin all around the bodice with the lining. And tuck in all those straps in and pin that portion closed, leaving a little opening for me to turn the bodice inside out. So once again, I'm going to cut down some of that excess fabric and then flip the bodice inside out now. Once I've got it flipped inside out, I'm going to give it a nice good press. That little opening there will be hand stitched closed, and then I'm going to press this bodice once I've done that. So here's my bodice all done, fully pressed and ready to wear. So here is the final look. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, hit that like button and be sure to watch the asymmetrical trumpet skirt that I made to go along with this crop top. Hit that subscribe button to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.